everyone. Welcome back to the CCO Follow podcast. Over this past month, we've been talking all about community, why it's important, and how, as the Christian, do we live and build relationships within our community and with others. And so today, Travis and I have Talia Miller on. She is one of our interns here. And Talia, kind of just give us a basic overview of like how you got to CCO.
Oh, goodness. Well, I was working and living at Black Lake Bible Camp. I still am, by myself for a little bit, and I was looking for like a good church to actually go to. And the previous summer, we had come like as the summer staff here on Sundays. I really enjoyed it. And then it wasn't until about like February when I was just invited to the young adults and was like, okay, fine, I'll actually get involved. And I've just been here ever since.
Wow. That's awesome. So, Travis, today we're talking about cross-generational relationships. And really what a community, being community-minded means that we're not just focused on our 5 little friends that we have, but we're focused on building relationships with those around us. And we think that you do that really well, Talia.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So we're really excited to kind of talk to you about what it's looked like for you. But Travis, why are we talking about cross-generational relationships?
Yeah, you know, Scripture is very clear that we are not meant to live alone and isolated. I think most people by default agree with that. They're like, yeah, you need people. It's not good for man to be alone. No one's an island. That's generally accepted even just greater community, not even inside Scripture. But one of the things we see as a specific command that is more focused in that general idea of community is that it's not just, have friends, but it's have cross-generational relationships that we see, you know, in Titus says the older shall teach the younger. We see Paul saying, you being younger, Timothy, be an example to those who are older. We see all this community that's meant to be had that goes beyond just, like you're saying, your 5 friends, the people who are of your age. We actually see this really kind of played out in 1 Kings 12 with King Solomon, his son, where King Solomon dies and King Rehoboam, he takes the throne, and his first act, he asks his dad's counselors, who are now older, what do you think I should do? And they give him input on what he should do. And then he's like, I don't really like your advice. I'm going to ask all my friends who are my age. And they give him totally opposite advice. And he takes their advice, and the kingdom then splits. Like it was like the worst moment in Israel's history, or one of them. And, you know, he only listened to his peers. And that's not an argument to only listen to those who are older. It's an argument of we should not be isolated into the echo chamber that is a single group. C.S. Lewis actually wrote down one of his quotes. It says that every age has its own outlook. It is especially good at seeing certain truths and specifically liable to making certain mistakes. We all therefore need the books that will correct the characteristic mistakes of our own period, and that means old books. And this is true for reading, but it's also true for our just day-to-day life. Totally. If you are younger, you may not have seen enough life or maybe enough specific events that would give you perspective on things we're experiencing now. And if you're older and you've lived through certain other things, but maybe you don't have some of the current struggles of today, you wouldn't even consider certain things that younger people are struggling with, and gives good insight into just general life, even for you, much less how to empathize and help them. And so we all have blinders, and essentially that is one big way we can remove blinders, is by having different stages of life, different ages, all being together, and realizing that that we all have a unique perspective that helps us each grow. Yeah.
So Talia, for you, what are your thoughts on cross-generational relationships, and what has it been like for you?
Well, I think it's incredibly important. I think Travis really hit the nail on the head of just the fact that we all have blinders and like the things that are going on in our life. Like the place where I'm at in my life right now, I've never been in this season of life.
Never have I ever.
Never have I ever. But it's so I can like go along with my friends who are also in the same seasons of life, or similar seasons and going through similar things. And that's really awesome to kind of have like the same people I can be kind of relying on.
Suffering together.
Yeah. Exactly.
And
Suffering
enjoying
together.
blessings.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's important too. But being able to kind of have that, but then also when there are kind of like those sufferings and things, I've never gone through them, so I can only really help my friends as much as I know myself. And if we're like suffering in those things at the same time, neither of us really have an answer. Whereas like other people who have actually like lived through these things and they're older than us can give us wisdom on how to actually like work through things and can actually like kind of help us. And they have the knowledge that we don't because they have the life experience that we don't. And so I think that's incredibly important in just building community for yourself, but also building a community of believers around you. And just as like a church to be able to have kind of like those layers of, you know, things that I don't know. I know things that you don't know. And so being able to kind of mesh those knowledges together to kind of create a very understanding and I think loving relationship with one another.
I can't remember if I have said this on the podcast before. Watch it be like the last episode.
Yeah. Only 20 times.
Yeah.
But it's so important to me the way that we look at this because I think it's like obvious, you know, it's very obvious, I think, for someone to listen to this and say, well, yeah, of course, you know, if you're 25, you're not going to know what a 50-year-old knows. And of course, in a situation that you don't know, you're going to want to seek out somebody who does. And vice versa, you know, looking at kind of an older, you know, person, you know, maybe you're 60 years old and you're like, I don't know what's happening with Instagram. I don't know what it is. Like, what is this thing? They're going to seek out someone who does. And it seems really obvious, but
well, and even just to maybe make the point a little like beneficial, like not to say Instagram, you know, it's just that can seem just like, oh, that's petty. And I think sometimes we can think, oh, young people don't really have anything to offer besides maybe fixing our printer. Where it's like, you know, by the way, can you fix my printer later? I'm kidding. But, you know, like I've seen many married couples, their marriage strengthen when hanging out with singles because the singles are blessed by like, wow, I forgot how much extra time I have. Not having kids or not having this, not having, you know, all these different things. But then some of the marriages I've seen actually strengthen. They're just like, wow, I forgot what it was like to be dating and like some of the things they're going through. And I'm so glad that I have you. And so glad, you know what I mean? Or even just like older people who, you know, maybe, you know, they experienced growing up at a very different age and being in a relationship with a younger person. They're like, wow, I never even thought about the fact that, you know, you grew up maybe in this context where literally the only time you got to play outside was at a park. That was not my life. Or, you know, you grew up, sure, having a phone and that brings cool benefits, but also, man, your generation has just terrible anxiety and all these problems because you were never taught how to handle these responsibly. And it helps us know how to pray for each other better, helps us know how to minister one each other better, and it helps us like see, okay, so this is something I don't even know about. You know, there's some older people who have never experienced anxiety.
That's really
it's much more than just the surface level. And I think those points are really obvious, but what we're conveying is this idea that this is by God's design. Like when he created the church and when he created humanity, we get, you know, we're at the time where over experience is important and it matters. And I like to think of it, this is what I think I brought up on the podcast, but I can't remember. I like to think of it like a circle. I definitely think I brought this up.
I don't know. It sounds good though. Keep going.
Good reminder for everyone.
Where, you know, in stages of life, you know, even you could look at this in actual age. You can look at this in a spiritual age. You can look at this in just experience in general of life. But, you know, when we have the young are really learning. They're going through it. And so they're being pulled along by those who are doing the work, those of us who are, you know, I like to think of it like a family, you know, like, you know, the dad's really working hard and they're, you know, maybe you have a young kid and they're taking them along with them and showing them this is how you work. But you have that grandparent there that's giving the wisdom of I'm teaching you these theories that you're working out with your parents right now, but now you're seeing the different side of it, why it's important. So you're learning, you know, the young is learning, you know, not only by the parent doing things, but they're learning the wisdom behind what they're doing. And then those parents then become the wise, and the children become the doers, and so it's this endless cycle. And if we're not focused on that, I think it's a wasted. I think it's to me it's a dead church. Dare I say? I think it's a dead church when we aren't living in community in that way. That's the cross-generational that's life. And I think it's very easy for at least Americans in the Western culture to not be really super cross-generational.
It's even encouraged.
Yeah,
It's very individualistic.
We specifically encourage these different ages and segments. And, just talking to someone in our church who's dating someone of a different culture. I feel like we're going back to the missions podcast. And they were telling me about how, they're grown up. You know what I mean? Like they're late 20s. They've moved out of their parents' house a long time ago. They're doing by American standards, it's like you're doing the right things. You're showing that you're responsible. You're doing these things, all these things that are like good, check off the boxes. For her culture, her parents are like, why is he not living with his parents in like a negative way? And like, it's a sign in her culture that, you're not living with your parents. Yeah. It shows that you're not willing to be submissive to them. It shows that you're trying to do something that they would not approve under their roof. That you stay with them until you're married. And some cultures, you stay with them after you're married. And, not saying ours is better or worse in that specific context, but as a whole, we lack relationships. Like, sure, move out when you turn 18, that's fine, but you shouldn't be cutting off older people relationships. And that's where I think we especially get it wrong.
I think that's something that I'm really enjoying just about the internship here is just being able to kind of see that in like a ministry aspect too. Because I think just tying it back to what you were saying about like the church, of just seeing things like behind the scenes, I guess, and seeing how like this is how things are done and this is why things are done, and be able to kind of see like the tradition behind it, but also seeing how a lot of our ideas and just like things that we've said have already kind of been used, and seeing how like we have change that's coming. There's change all around the world, and that's very much like the younger generation were very much associated with just like change and new things. And so being able to pull that in while also keeping like the tradition of why things are done and just the wisdom behind that, like you were saying.
Okay, talking about the internship, what has that been like? Because you guys are definitely the youngest who are, I would consider you guys being on staff at some level, and you guys are definitely the youngest. What is it like dealing with, because there's generations, right? Like I'm a little bit older than you guys. Travis is middle-aged, and we have all these different generations. Has it been like for you to work with us and the relationships that you're making? What's that like?
Yes. I'm going to kind of pull in my work at Black Lake as well, just because I've been there for 7 years. And we're still kind of like starting out a little bit in here, but it's been really awesome just kind of getting to see the way that things are done and like how a church is like run and how everybody's kind of, you bounce ideas around like along each other, but you're also kind of walking alongside each other in things that are happening. And so it definitely kind of creates this family aspect. And I know at Black Lake, or at least in the past couple of years that I've been like on full-time staff there, is kind of the same way of being able to kind of see, okay, this is why this person does this thing, and how like their life kind of how they've lived their life adds to how they live their in like ministry. And then being able to see how like that's just for everybody, and seeing like the behind the scenes of it's not just like when you're or it's not just like when John is like up preaching, but he has like a whole life that's like behind that, and being able to see how like that is kind of added into just the like office and family aspect in a church as well. If that makes any sense.
He puts on his pants one leg at a time, just like everyone else.
Yeah, he's human. Oh my goodness.
I think, speaking a little bit about what I think personally, I think when you see a church I'll just say church. When you see a church and you look at this, like who's on staff, and you look at who's like leading, the ministry leaders, the volunteers, when you see a wide range of ages and understandings, to me that's a sign of a healthy church. Because if the way that so you mentioned Black Lake and working there. That's a Christian organization, and when you step outside of the Christian organization, you look into like the workplace, the cross-generational relationships it's more of authority.
They don't really exist.
Yeah, it's more of
it happens on accident if it happens.
Yeah, and it's an authoritarian type of system where it's like, you've been here for 30 years in this company,
or you just hold the status.
Yeah,
or
hold
you're
the
just
status.
older in general.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like that. You know, I'm going to defer to you. Nothing I am is going to be as good as what you say. And I guess it works on some level, but it really doesn't, because you're missing out all of this new creativity that could come from it. But then you look at the reverse, where you look at, I think of like Google, Amazon, like all the big really like tech startups that have happened in the past decade now. There's been some missteps, and you look at like, I'm just picturing like Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know why I'm bringing this up right now, but at the early stages, it was just the kids. Like they were just running everything. And Mark realized, this isn't going to work. We need to pull in somebody who has experienced this. And that's what they did. And so I just think it's really important when we look at our lives as Christians and being in the church, to welcome the younger generations and welcome working with the older generations. And because now it's more than just work. So like I'm talking about work, but relationally, you had a story about, you know, your grandparent or your parents over in Florida, or your grandparents, and for your kids and stuff. Like that is important.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that when you mix different groups of people together, the more varied they are, the more blessing there's to be had. Like, so, you know, some of the factors you have is you have like age, you have stage of life, you have talents and things like that. And so you get a mix of different, you know, physical, financial, perspective, eagerness, experience. You kind of get all these different factors that meld together that creates a lot of unique blessings. Like the example, you know, you pointing out the example I gave in the last episode where, you know, we had people who, because we didn't have family in the area, but we had young kids, and we had all these elderly who essentially became almost like adoptive godparents, kind of. And, you know, that was a massive blessing. It was a massive blessing financially. It was a massive blessing help-wise. It was a massive blessing just having experience with interacting with older people. We had young people who they were a blessing to us, where like they would sometimes give us free babysitting because they knew we couldn't afford it. They would, you know, just be a really almost fun uncle type to our kids. But then we were able to be a blessing to them, where we would have them over and, you know, have that kind of stability foundation, because they didn't have family in that area either. And so they got to see a healthy marriage. They got to see healthy parenting. They got to be invited into someone's home where maybe they, you know, just live in a 1-bedroom apartment and they're like, oh, I don't feel like I can have, you know, people over. Well, they got to experience it in our home and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's everyone has different contexts and blessings, and it's not always, you know, it's not always that the younger person always, you know, has the small apartment, or the old person always has, you know, the free time. Those are stereotypes, but in general, it's, you know, you mix all these different people of different varieties, different backgrounds, different histories, and they bless each other.
Yeah. Do you have any specific stories of how your relationships, you know, cross-generationally have impacted you as a blessing?
Not a curse. No, like, yeah, I mean, we'll give a couple.
Let me think. I think the person that kind of always comes to mind for me when just thinking about somebody who is older than me and I've been able to create like a really amazing relationship with, mainly just because of the way that she's mentored me, is Jerusha Schaefer. She's our program director's wife. And she, in the summers, will take any of the lead staff that are on summer staff, and she'll meet with the girls throughout the summer, just one-on-one, and kind of getting to know us and helping us through things. And my first summer that I was able to do that, I had just moved back up here to Washington from Texas, where my parents are, and it was kind of it was like an exciting time. It was my first summer on lead staff. I was moving back up here. I was transferring to a different college. It was a lot of things going on. And at the same time, she kind of looked at me and she was like, are you doing okay? Are you like, why are you doing this? And was very much set on loving me and getting to know me, but also making sure that my heart was in the right place for things. And then being able to kind of continue that relationship in like through the year and then into the next summer, and seeing how I went off to college and didn't really have my heart in the right place. And then I came back and she just welcomed me with open arms again and just being like, hey, it's okay. Like, and just kind of came over and just gave me a hug and let me cry on her couch a bit. And just kind of walked me through those things, and just having kind of that woman who's just able to be like an amazing mentor to me when she's lived just through her life as well. And getting to see the similarities in between us, while also being able to kind of see the ways that like how her life is differed, and being able to kind of learn from those differences as well in all of that. That's just kind of my favorite example, just because of how deeply she has impacted me, like not just in my life, but just spiritually as well.
Yeah. That's huge. Well, we wouldn't be talking about this though if it was comes easy, right?
Yeah.
We wouldn't be talking about it if everybody was doing it. So what makes it difficult to build the relationships with cross-generationally?
Oh, just all the differences. I think one kind of big challenge, I would say, would just be the fact that a lot of the times, I can't be a spokesperson for everyone, but this is kind of, I think...
No, just speak for everyone. Speak for all 20-year-olds.
Oh, no. But just kind of the way that sometimes when the younger generation tries to approach the older generation in things, the older generation can kind of just look at us and be like, you're just a child. You don't know anything. It's like, well, yeah, I don't know anything. That's why I'm coming to you. And kind of just having that kind of like difference right there, where it almost makes it feel like to us, like we don't have anything worthy to say, or we don't, we're not just being listened to. And sometimes we want to just come and like create a relationship, and be able to say things. It's like, maybe we are in the wrong about these things, but we don't entirely know because we've never lived this. You have lived in these ways, but also there are differences. And so just having, or sometimes experiencing it, where there's a challenge of people don't want to really listen to those differences and be like, yeah, my generation deals with anxiety and all these things 10 times more than your generation does. Can you please listen to the fact that we experience that? Is I feel like there can be a lot of kind of backlash on, well, you aren't doing this right, or you're not doing this right, you're not doing this right. It's like, well, we also just appreciate mentorship through that rather than, hey, you're not doing these things right.
Yeah, it's kind of like almost like mutual respect. I think one of the things that also, I mean, like you were saying, that the differences is what makes it difficult, and it's also the differences that are the blessing. So it's kind of like, there you go.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, but you know, when I think about what builds relationships in general, I feel like it's mutual vulnerability, and that's just hard. It's hard enough with people you already have relationships with. It's hard when people are initiating, and I think some of that,
it's even harder when it's new.
Yeah, and you know, I can definitely think of people who are older who have been very vulnerable, but I think the older you get, the harder it is to be vulnerable.
Totally.
You have essentially, quote unquote, more to lose, and you're worried that people will think less of you. Where when you're younger, you already feel like people already think less of you, and I think some of that also just comes from potentially past experiences that we carry with us. You know what I mean? Like some of it's definitely perceived, but some of it's not.
Yeah, and it's not just vulnerability; it's mutual humility.
Yeah.
I think about what is it, like Matthew 10 something. Where Jesus is talking about discipleship and how the disciple is no greater than the disciple maker. And if we're talking about community, really what we are talking about is discipleship.
Yeah.
And when we build relationships, it's very much like discipleship. And we would just fail miserably if either side came at it you know, like, oh, I'm better than thou, or without humility. And I think humility breeds vulnerability, because when we understand, you know, we're not greater than the Creator.
Yeah.
And when we understand that truth, we can come at these relationships in a much more humble and healthy, vulnerable way.
Yeah.
To say, I know this because I've experienced this, and you're going through this, and I don't know what that's like, but how can we work together? How can we, you know, and I think that's the key. You mentioned just how, you know, oftentimes the temptation, I think, because I've experienced this too, and I've even experienced this myself, where, you know, maybe you're younger and you don't know something, and you're coming, and it's like, oh, you're doing it all wrong, and all these different things. It's so easy to say that, because it's like, oh yeah, I've been through high school. Why are you asking me about, you know, you're just doing it all wrong. You got to change this and change that. But the reality is, it doesn't matter what led that to happen, whether you think it's wrong and it actually is wrong or whatever.
What matters is you're experiencing it right now, and you're asking for help to get out of it.
Exactly. And so if we can all be better at just as really what it comes down to is thinking of others before self.
Yeah. And I feel like just the point that you're making of just like pride in general, I think is where my generation very much fails. I can sit here and kind of like talk about like the challenges and put it a lot on older generations, but it is very much also on the fact that we can hear things from people who are older than us and then just kind of be like, I don't actually want to listen to you. And so it's very much just on like the younger generation to kind of just get off of your high horse and deflate your ego and recognize that you don't know it all. And yes, there's a lot of changes, and there's a lot of things that the older generation might not understand, but there's a lot that you don't know and that you're going through that can very much be mentored and helped through other people who are older than you.
Yeah. I mean, it really does kind of, at the end of the day, express itself in love. Like talking about humility, talking about other-centered, talking about even how you interact with each other, stuff like that. Like, it's really just kind of like this overall, like, be loving. And like, you know, there was a pastor, he was the youth pastor at Mount Lake, Calvary Mount Lake Terrace, now named, what's it called now? Mount Lake Church, I think. They just recently renamed, but he was a pastor there for like 35, 40 years. I think his name was Craig. I'm blanking now, but I remember going to a workshop from him years ago, like this was over a decade ago. And he said consistently, youth will go to the oldest, most loving person in the room. And you get both those combinations. And if the most loving person, if the oldest one is, 35, that's who they're going to go to. If the oldest one is 65, that's who they're going to go to. And I saw that plenty in high school. I saw that plenty with individuals. And obviously he had years of experience showing that to be true as well. But, I even just think about yesterday, Gabriel, from our church came to my house to help me change out some switches for our fans in our bathrooms. And
you're so excited about this.
I'm so excited.
That's Alicia's story. They look so cool.
So we had 3 to change, and I was going to change one with him so I could do the other 2 by myself. And he's very gracious when it comes to teaching stuff. I've been taught a lot of stuff by a lot of people, and I ask a lot of questions because I want to understand it all the way. And he's just explaining some things a couple times, never treating like, oh, that's stupid, never treating like, just very loving in it. And then after he left, I took my boys and 8 and 6 and was like, hey, you're gonna help Daddy change these other 2 fans.
The cycle.
And yeah, exactly. And it really is, and it's and I think it's just that kind of shows of just, there's people I probably wouldn't ask to teach me that, who know it, but I wouldn't ask them. Sure. You know what I mean? And there's lots of people who I would be willing to ask. But we do naturally, as people, we gravitate toward the person who's going to be able to help us, but also who's going to be able to do it lovingly. Yeah. And I think the more loving we can be in whatever stage we're in, whatever gifts we have, whatever things we have to offer, the more likely that people will engage with us, so we actually have the opportunity to do that.
Well, and what is it? I'm curious. I don't know if you have stories about this, but what about on the other end of the spectrum, where, where have you seen, yourselves help or bless the older generations.
There is one in particular I can think of that I'm going to stay very vague on details because of the nature of the issue that happened. But essentially, there were some older people who I know who were going through some issues that they felt disqualified them from essentially living the Christian life. And not that they forsake their belief in Jesus, but they were, their lives were having problems. And both of them, a few of them separately came to me of just kind of like, life's over. Like at this point, you're 60, 70, even high 70s, it can feel like life's over. And when you mess up big enough, it feels like there's so little track left that it's like, well,
can't make up for it.
Nope, it's done. It's over. And being a younger person looking at that, I think younger, you naturally have a little more hope filled of the future. But you also have the ability to be like, there's so many people I look who are older who have messed up and not been perfect. And I was able to say, as a younger person looking at your life and your situation, it's not over. Not just in the sense of you probably have many more lives left, more years left, but also from the perspective of I've seen plenty of people mess up, get back up again, and it didn't ruin their testimony. It didn't ruin their final story end. And it doesn't have to be years down the road. It can be weeks. And that's because, as a younger person, I'm looking at people older than me a lot more often, probably, than older people are looking at each other. Yeah. And so I was able to just greatly encourage them. Like, they were very encouraged by just having someone younger than them be able to say, no, it's not over. And I don't view you through this lens of you've screwed up and it's all done. And I think just simple biblical encouragement is honestly one way, because sometimes seeing it from a young person, I think any age, young people, it's easy to be like, oh, old people don't care what I think. I think old people, it's very easy to be like, young people don't care to hear from me anymore. And I think just showing that, like, no, I care about you and I think you're valuable is a massive ministry to them.
Totally.
But
I'm gonna jump in here. I have to confess.
Oh no.
There's been a lot of relationships in my life that have been with, an older generational type thing. I would even consider us. I know I'm not that far off because you're old, but
it's the second time he's called you old.
I know.
And I've always, how do I explain this? I always, being a youth, my sister was 4 years older than me. And I feel like that's the cusp of, like, I never really hung out with her, but I also didn't, like, I also wasn't like an only child. Yeah. And so I always got stuck kind of in the in-between where my family was making friends with her friends' family. And so it would always be an older generation or older person in general that I would be kind of at their house. They didn't have kids my age. So it was like, I always felt this kind of I never really got along super well with kids my age. And so I've always worked with older people. So I'm putting that out there. I don't know why I brought up that whole big story, but I have to confess that a lot of my failures in relationships with the older generation and just cross-generational in general has been with family. And I don't know why that is. I think there's something to just being more open and saying some things that maybe without thinking maybe to your family that you wouldn't necessarily consider with other people, but
they see a side of you that nobody else ever sees.
Right, which is kind of sad. I don't know how I feel about that, but I confess there's been so many times, especially as I've been getting older, like, turning 18, going to college, where, I definitely value my dad's, thoughts and his advice and my mom's, care for me. But there's been a lot of times where I've just kind of said, I'm not listening to you because you're wrong. And sometimes they were wrong, but the way that I went about it was
also wrong.
Was so wrong. And I think where we can grow I don't know if you've experienced this, or maybe someone's listening. And
I've
they're
never
like,
responded wrongly.
Yeah, but
ever.
Travis was the perfect child.
I think where we can grow in that is understanding that as you get older, you learn and you experience different things, and maybe your experience is true, and maybe you're going about it, but that older person or that father or that mother, they might not have the right answer specifically for that exact thing, but there's nothing new under the sun. We know that. They're the what's the word I'm thinking of? The
endless persistence of time.
Theme of maybe the theme of their answer to their theme of their wisdom and advice is right on. It might not be the exact, specific, detailed, successful answer, but the reason behind it is what we're supposed to glean. And I think in my situation, just understanding that, and I've really been trying to work on that with my family, is like I hear them, I listen to them, and I'm trying to get to the deeper. Why are they saying it this way? What's the meaning? And
what's
it helps
that thing that John says about like laying the tape?
Playing the tape?
Laying the tape.
Oh,
There's one of his sermons
later they will remember it and recite it.
Yeah, totally.
It's almost like, and I don't want to equate the advice we give to each other as scripture, but it's similar to, in the sense that with scripture, we observe, interpret, apply. And, with something someone's telling us, advice or giving us, you need to observe it, make notes of it, interpret it, understand what they're communicating, but then apply it, and be like, oh, okay. So like one example I think of, because this is like the classic, older person to younger person, bad advice, is they're like, well, just, the way I got my first job, I just, I went in and I wore my suit and I turned in my letter and, I just started calling them. Yeah. Where if you've gotten a job in the last 5 years, you're probably familiar. If you call to follow up, you will not get the job. Like 99% of times, they will just take you out and say, nope, this person's bothering us. But what is, okay, interpret that and then apply it to your situation. Okay, they were diligent. Okay, they showed that they cared. How can I show that I care? Back then, it was wearing a suit when I turned in my resume.
Now it's going to look different. Exactly. Yeah.
And so there's certain things you can absolutely learn from each other. It's just sometimes you need to learn how to apply it in a different age.
Totally.
And I think that right there is kind of where we can get lost in communication between the generations.
Words don't always mean even the same thing.
They don't mean the same thing. The way that like you would interpret that thing, or the way that you're intending it, is kind of different than the way that like I'm interpreting it. For like back then it was you wear a suit and now it's not. And so most of the time we can kind of hear that advice be given to us, and then it's like, well, that's not how it is now. And that's typically where the conversation ends.
It's like, you don't understand me,
it's
so
different.
I'm
okay,
done.
let's stop. But it's like pushing through and being able to continue that conversation and being like, well, that's not how jobs are really doing it anymore. Is like, what are you meaning through that? So actually just like continuing just the conversation in general, and not just like putting a pin in it.
And this is why I think cross-generational relationships are oftentimes the most meaningful and the most deep.
Totally.
They're some of the deepest relationships, because when you're just with, your peers, it's easy to bring up that one thing you have in common and be like, oh yeah. And then it's
we
like,
understand all the inside jokes.
You don't talk anymore about it. It's like, yep, we get along,
we're
on the same page.
But
the reality is you're not going deep like that. But when you're building these relationships with, people who aren't have that same things, going along with them, it's, you have to seek out those things, and it becomes way deeper.
We lived in Florida for 7.5 years and moved back. Of the people who were similar to me, I probably keep in touch with like maybe 3 or 4, which of people who were similar to me, there was a much bigger pool of that amount of people. Of people that were very different from me. So like people who are much older than me, or people who are very different stages of life, even if they're around my same age, I keep in touch a much higher percentage. I probably keep in touch with maybe like 6 or 7 people of that category, even though they made up maybe 10 to 20% of our total, like people we interact with while we were there. They are deeper relationships for I can't even explain why. It's just different.
It's more intentional in a way.
Yeah, it's more intentional.
Yeah.
You see more specific long-term fruit and value from it. Not saying it's not valuable. Again, we already talked about that, of having people your own age, but it's just we were made to be intergenerational, and you already have so many defaults of your own age that when you actually took the time to build that intergenerational one, or that life stage one, it holds so much stronger.
Yeah. So what we're getting at is, I love the word you use, intentional. It's weird, Travis, how we've been doing the podcast for a while now, and in the parenting podcast, in the Bible study podcast, in the missions podcast, that word intentional is always used, and
life doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah, life does not happen by accident. Building relationships, living in community, it requires being intentional. And I think that's a really good, I'm glad you pointed that out.
Yeah. I think it's just an important thing that separates us from the rest of the world too, especially when it comes to community and relationships, is a lot of the rest of the world is just kind of like, I have, not to be like super young here, but I have like my Snapchat friends who I'm just gonna like send them
super
like
young.
Sorry. I'm just gonna like send them like my streak in the morning, and we're gonna keep that up, and then that's kind of it. Or you have like your people like on Instagram that you like will respond to their stories and stuff, or just like all those kind of things, which can seem very like on the surface very intentional of being like, I'm keeping up with them, whereas together we kind of, when it's real like intentional relationship, it's very much just kind of going to that person and being like, hey, let's get coffee, and then trying to like keep that up, or like hey, let's like do a Bible study together, or I'm going to like something that I've been trying to challenge myself to do anytime that like I'm coming into the office at camp is just not just like walking by. There's two ladies that sit in the front, it's Mary and Alice, and not just walking by them and being like good morning, but like stopping and being like, hi Mary, how's like your day going, how are the kids, how's James, your husband, talking to Alice for a while, and actually like intentionally kind of building up that relationship with them, not just like intentional in quotes. So it's like yeah.
Absolutely.
So
I think just one other side benefit that I thought I'd mention, because I think the things we've talked about with intergenerational relationships and their benefits are the more obvious ones, because it's the day-to-day, all the stuff of different strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that. But one of the ones that I think, it's fresh in my mind once we just talked to Dallas is like when you go through crisis, that when you are in intergenerational relationships, your crises tend to be at different times.
Totally.
I've been able to be there for people who are older than me when their grandparents died, and then mine passed, and then when their parents died, and I don't look forward to that, but eventually that will happen to me too. You're not living in a certain crisis. When you're younger, you're more prone to have crisis of, so when you're my age, you're more prone to have crisis of marriage issues, of even lost pregnancies or things like that. When you're in your age, I just was speaking to someone really recently where they were going through the issue of, they had a boyfriend who they're no longer with, and they saw him, and it was really hard. It's a different type of crisis, it's different timing, it's a different, all these kind of things, and we're better fit to obviously there's certain benefit to similarities and sharedness in our crisis, but there's also benefit to someone being outside that crisis who can hold on to you while the waves are going over you. And that's another benefit of just the cross-generational relationships, is your crises don't happen at the same time or the same things, so you're able to hold on to one another, because you're not all sinking at the same time.
And it's not even like extreme crises either. Like this literally just happened to me, but my car was out of commission for a few days, and this was the first time. My car's, it's an old car, it's had its issues, but it works, it gets me from point A to point B, but this has had its issues, and most of the time I'm just able to kind of like FaceTime my dad and fix it and feel like a mechanic, and it's awesome. This time was unfortunately not one of those moments, and I had to get it like towed to a mechanic and everything. And it was the first time I was ever experiencing this, where I was like, I don't know what to do. I have to actually bring it like to someone to like fix it, and it's insane, which is like such a small little thing to kind of be dealing with, but at the same time, when it's your first time dealing with it,
it doesn't feel small.
It doesn't feel small. It's kind of a big thing. And so Alice, who I just mentioned, she's only 10 or 11 years older than me, but she's had like slews of car problems in her life.
Oh, your car broke down.
Yeah. I was even like talking to her about
Yeah.
that. I was like, this is like a new area of life. I've never had to experience this. And
Yeah.
she's like, oh, Talia, just wait. And so, but she was able to kind of come like beside me through that and was like, hey, you can borrow my car. I can help you with these different things.
Yeah.
Or even just having other people around me who are like, hey, we have a good mechanic and we'll call them for you and we'll try and like figure this out and like actually walk through it with you was incredibly helpful, especially not having like my parents with me and not being able to just like have my dad fix it, but like have to figure it out and have like a community of people who
I think
knew
it's
what
all
to
the
do.
more important when we live in a society where you don't tend to near live family. It shows itself all the more. And I think Alice made that great second step. I think sometimes when you've experienced something a lot and you're older or you've experienced something, it's easy to just be like, oh, it's fine. And you leave it at that.
Yeah.
But you said, she said, oh, it's fine, to give the comforting, don't worry. But then she took
Let
the
me
time to
help
walk
you.
alongside.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that second part is sometimes missed because once you're past something, especially something you've experienced multiple times, it's easy to be like, oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
They're going to get through it. I got
Yeah.
through it. So what? When it's like, but you could act like Jesus right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Like
could help me.
You could walk through.
Yeah, you
And even
have
if-
people around you to help you.
Yeah. And even if they'll get through it on their own, why make them get through it on their own?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, let's do this together.
Exactly. And that's where being humble and vulnerable
Yeah. And loving.
is, and intentional is
Intentional.
Whoa,
is important.
came full circle.
Man, I was gonna say something, but now it's fleeting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think before we wrap up, what does it mean? Okay, I remember what I was gonna say.
There you go.
In community, what you were saying is like you had somebody who walked through you. That, oh, I know a good mechanic. I know. That's the other aspect of community that I think is so important, and I really am very passionate about this. Where it's almost like a form of community building, but when we are intentional, when we are humble and vulnerable, and we build these relationships with those around us in our community, it becomes this greater
The parts are
tool.
greater than the sum.
Yes, and what happens is then you're able to
greater than parts.
now because that
Flip
person
it.
knew that mechanic and now and you've been through that experience. Now oh, I know a good mechanic, and you're building relationships, and so it becomes this community that is self-sustained. But the reality is that's what the church, like the job of the church is that. And if we're not going around getting to know people and building relationships with them, like if I didn't have a relationship, like it's funny that you said that because I have a really good relationship with my mechanic, partly because I buy cars that
Partially because you give
need
them a lot of money.
work. Yeah.
Great relationship.
But I've been able to build relationships with, and now like through that, I was able to help some, one of my other friends purchase a car, and by the relationships that we build, we help others around us.
Yeah.
And if we're a church that just says, nope, we're going to focus on just each other,
Yeah.
it's useless.
Yeah.
Like it's just like a pebble on the road. There's nothing to it. But if we're actively engaging with one another and with our community, it's just like a big, what are they, amoebas? The bacteria that just suck everything up. It seems kind of weird, but that's the way I think about it. It's like, I want to be like that. I want to be like the blob that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. That's going to be a generational thing, and the older generations will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You probably don't.
I think I do.
Maybe.
But I'm not sure.
I mean, everyone knows what a
The
blob is. So
Yeah. Everybody knows what a blob, but the blob.
the specific blob.
Thriller movie, scary
Yeah.
movie. Anyways, before we close out, if you have anything else that you want to just get off your chest or say.
Well,
your
actually,
time.
on what you were just saying.
Perfect.
Not about the blob, but it's unfortunately so incredibly easy for us to kind of get into like a Christian bubble. To kind of use camp as an example, every summer you're in this camp bubble, and this isn't just like if you have like worked at a summer camp, it's if you like go to camp, and you just kind of, it creates like this spiritual high, and it's amazing, and there's nothing that is going on in the world around you. I specifically remember in 2020 when like the whole world was on fire, almost literally. It was like I didn't even really experience much of it until like September. Because first I was living in Texas and it wasn't as like intense. And then I was at camp for a whole summer where even where we were like being impacted by it, it was just, there is nothing going on other than what is happening like right in front of me. It's absolutely crazy. And it's unfortunately really difficult to kind of get outside of that bubble a little bit. And I think the same thing kind of happens to the church, where it's like we have our little church bubble and it's everything that's happening here inside the bubble. Whereas, I mean, to go back to all the missions, like we're called to go out and to make disciples of all nations and to and that doesn't just include like going out of like the country or the state or whatever, but that includes like walking outside your door, both like your house or just like the church, and actually engaging with the community around you and kind of creating that, not just strengthening the one that is inside the church and being able to kind of be like, hey, I have this good mechanic, and kind of building that community, but also going out and like talking to that mechanic. Like, is that mechanic a Christian? Have they like, do they go to church? And just kind of then like branching out from there as well. And seeing how there's so many more opportunities outside of this bubble that we've put ourselves in.
Absolutely.
That's a very good word.
Yeah. The bubble in some ways is much easier. Like, I'll never forget that I've been home alone where Alicia takes the boys for one reason or another. When we lived in Florida, it was to visit family, you know, to go somewhere else, whatever. It's happened like 3 times since we've had kids. And the first time I sharply remember kind of realizing this halfway through her trip. And then each time since, I've been like, I've proactively noticed, like, okay, I'm going to be noticing this, is that man, it's so much easier when they're gone. It's so much easier. Like, I get my, I totally
have one dish.
Yeah,
one spoon.
I absolutely bachelor it. I totally do. I have 1 cup, 1 plate, 1 bowl, 1 spoon, 1 fork.
I'm going to reuse these later.
It's so easy. Well, I mean, I wash it, you weirdo.
Well, of course you wash, yes.
But like, you know, you finish your meal and you wash those like 3 things and you're done. And you put stuff away and it's exactly where you put it. In fact, there's so many things I wouldn't need to put away because it was just like, it's not going to be moved. I'll just put it here and it'll be fine. And it was so much easier. Relationships are messy, but they're so much better. Like, it's what we're literally made for. And anyone who is desiring, you know, intergenerational relationships, whether it be through home groups, whether it be through intentional, just reaching out to someone who you want to walk alongside with, life with, it makes life messier. It means that you will be challenged in different ways. It means that you will experience more crises because they will have their own crisis that now you are brought into. You will have just messier lives. But it's better. It's guaranteed better.
Totally. Thank you, Talia, for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening and watching. Vulnerability, humility, intentionality. Think about those things because that's where we want to be as Christians, and that's how we build community together. Thanks, guys. Thank you again. And as always, God bless.